Hi, Ryok.
This day of your time.
Yeah, greetings to you.
Yes, greetings. How would you like to explore together?
Okay. In our first interaction, you helped me with my passion of exploring my psychic abilities, and much thanks to you for that.
Yes,
Now
it
I
was
want to dis-
so joyful and exciting to share what we did with you at that time.
now I want to discuss my other passion, which is the exploration of anti-gravity UFO technology.
All right.
Okay, so I've been researching this field for 12 years, motivated by desire to become totally self-sufficient so that I could free myself from government regulations and travel restrictions. I taught myself electrical engineering and physics and found actual blueprints or notes on supposedly real UFO technology. So I'm going to read out each one and then you can follow up with an analysis on the theory and practical application.
All right. That is fine with us. Please proceed.
Okay, so I was online searching for some information and I found some information left by an anonymous person. He didn't reveal his identity. But anyways, it said that a copper coil at the outer rim located on the interior of the vessel going all the way around and connected to itself, creating a closed loop system of stationary, while a large wheel having very large neodymium magnets located at the outer edge of said wheel allows only the north ends of the magnets to pass in close proximity to the stationary copper coil, then creates a very high voltage of 20 million volts in the closed coil system. That voltage is then fed to an iron pole located running through the center of the craft from the top of the disc-shaped craft to the bottom of the craft, where the current is then fed to three large dual-plated capacitors located at the bottom outside of the craft, where the current is then transformed from electrical current to electrostatic fields projected outward from the bottom of the craft, where this static field then bends around the outside of said craft, attracted to the top of the iron pole at the top of the craft, where the field then dissipates into the top of the pole, flowing in the same direction as the new incoming electrical current just in from the coil, and the field is then transferred back into electrical current again. This continues recirculating this way forever.
Yes. And the idea being here, it's simply the creation of a high frequency electromagnetic field, which, when tuned to a proper frequency, can actually disrupt how electromagnetism expresses itself on your planet, which through that disruption, an anti-gravitational effect can be created. So it's a means of producing anti-gravity through a specific frequency of electromagnetism. So that energy is converted into its static form, as you described, which creates a bit of an anti-gravity EMF bubble around the craft, which ultimately allows for it to be free from the gravitational effects that planets can exert upon different objects. And one of the major, you could say, power supplies for the gravitational field in the first place that a planet generates are the forces of electromagnetism. So when those forces are altered by the EMF of the craft, gravity can effectively be displaced. It's one of the ways of achieving an anti-gravitational effect. It's not the only way, but it's a way of doing it that is based in electromagnetism.
Okay. Would you happen to have any idea where this information comes from?
It relates to the idea of cultures that are a part of your Earth. For understand, there were actual, at different times, Earth-based crafts that were able to disrupt the gravitational forces of your planet, and in doing so are able to create airborne vehicles. So some of this is information that your species has already utilized in more ancient times to create vehicles capable of flight. So the information has a connection to your Earth, to more ancient versions of humanity. However, there are also connections to off-world societies, for different civilizations have also used this technological means to create their own anti-gravitational effects. Different beings from the Pleiadian system, back when their kind was more physicalized, built their crafts in such a way that utilized the forces of electromagnetism to displace gravity, to disrupt that gravitational effect. This was also a type of technology utilized by the Orion people. At times, the Anunnaki also utilized such technologies for their craft. Understand that this means of anti-gravitation is only one level of what is possible using the technology you have mentioned. So many other forms of travel can also be available to occupants of a craft that houses this particular technology. So not only can this technology be used for anti-gravitational effects, but that electromagnetic field that is generated can also access different portals, allowing for different types of effects like teleportation to be available to the craft and the occupants. So more refined versions of this technology have the capacity to open up portals, let's just say, that can enable the ship to then teleport to another location when those particular technologies are taken to a further level of refinement.
Okay. Is the electric field the same as the gravitational field?
It functions as this, yes. It functions for the craft as an anti-gravitational field. That's how we would classify the type of field that this EMF generates around the craft. It's more of an anti-gravity field. It can be used to generate gravitational fields. However, in this instance, it is more of an anti-gravitational field effect being described.
And how were the engineers able to match the energy of the electric field to gravity without measuring the frequency of gravity itself?
By understanding the underlying geometry. Are you familiar with the idea of what has been called the doctrine of signatures or the science of correspondences? Are you familiar with these concepts?
No, I've never heard of those.
All right. Well, it relates to the idea that if you can create within your own reality an energetic effect that resonates with another reality or another person or a certain situation, if you match the energies closely enough, you will, with your own energy, with your own creation, create in your reality an effect that mirrors whatever the energy is that you're tuning into. So, for example, gravity, in terms of the geometry, expresses as what you call the Fibonacci sequence. Are you with us so far?
Yes, I'm familiar with the Fibonacci sequence.
All right, yes. So to visually understand gravity, that particular geometry can act as a representation. So instead of measuring the frequency of gravity in numbers, what the crafts do with their technology is they produce energetically what you would consider to be an anti-Fibonacci spiral. This would be a Fibonacci spiral that's moving in the opposite direction, in a sense, opposing the movement of the gravitational field. It presents a bit of a counter force and an opposing type of energy, which ultimately can cancel out the gravitational effect of a planet. So, in a sense, these ships and their technologies match the energy of a planet's gravitation, of a planet's gravity, vibrationally speaking, but they match it in a way that is opposite of the energetic movement of the planet's gravitational field. So the way that this is done is through the idea of a Fibonacci energy geometry pattern being generated by the craft. Because they understand the geometry of the gravity itself, they can create a similar yet opposing geometry in the craft. And many of these species work primarily with geometries rather than with actual numbers. Does that answer the question sufficiently?
Yes, it does.
Oh.
And the question about the speed of this craft, 1,200 miles per hour was the recommended maximum flight speed. So how would a pilot be shielded from G-forces if he is to fly faster than 1,200?
Well, the idea is that what actually allows for the pilots to stay intact is the idea that the craft is actually teleporting. What individuals perceive to be the craft moving at accelerated speeds is not mechanically what's actually taking place. What these crafts do is, again, using the electromagnetic field that is generated, is they vibrate the craft in a way that allows for the craft to resonate with the particular location that represents a preferred destination. And that field that we mentioned operates as a portal. So the craft can disappear from one location and reappear in another. To all of you on Earth, when you observe this, it might look linearly like the craft is moving from point A to point B. But that's just how your physical minds translate the movement of these craft. It's not that they are going from one point across a road to another point. What the craft are doing is they are going from point to point to point to point to point, skipping the road altogether. But because your physical brains aren't used to perceiving movement in that way, your physical brains will oftentimes fill in the gap and will create the perception of that craft moving along a trajectory. But that's just for convenience, so your brains can more easily understand the movement of the craft. In actuality, it's blipping in and blipping out from one place to another. And because that effect of teleporting actually is something that comes from the energy of stillness and non-movement, the pilots and the occupants of the craft are able to remain intact. Because in order to actually blip in and blip out, one must totally dissolve energetically. One must totally detach from the locational frequency they're aligned with. And that detachment comes from a letting go. That comes from a place of stillness, inner stillness. So what appears to be a craft moving at record speeds from point to point to point to point to point is actually a craft remaining perfectly still and shifting its locational frequency, allowing for it to disappear and then reappear in another space and time. So that's what's happening. That's how these pilots are able to actually survive the movements. There's not really any movement at all in the way you traditionally think of it.
Yes, this is obviously advanced alien technology.
Yes.
I never would have thought that we as humans actually possess this capability as well. So
Yes.
because you're saying basically I'm at the level now where I can actually replicate this technology. You're saying I also would have the ability to build a craft that can shift to different frequencies. This is what you're saying?
It's possible to do this. Yes, absolutely. The key is first understanding how to do it in your own body. Because recognize the craft is just an extension that you use to exercise the ability to move, to travel, to teleport. Of course, those abilities come first and foremost from your consciousness. And your consciousness then expands that, extends that out to the craft or the vehicle or the spaceship, whatever it is. So if you understand how to do that in your own body, which is the same process of shifting your vibration to shift to a different reality, As you then master that within yourself, you'll know how to replicate that effect you're already utilizing all the time in a craft. So it is possible to build such a thing, and your ancients have had these things before. There are depictions of such technologies in your yogic cultures, in some of your Tibetan cultures, in some of your channeled translations of what occurred in the times of Atlantis. These types of things did exist. And it was all based on the idea of electromagnetism. Now, as we have said, some of these crafts that were a part of the more ancient versions of them on your world did not utilize teleportation technologies in the same way. They actually moved from point to point to point. But as we had mentioned, when the technology becomes refined to a certain level, it then becomes capable of teleportation. So it's the same technology, it's just stretching the capacity of the technology to be able to handle those types of collective vibrational shifts, which allows for the whole crew, the craft occupants, to blip in and blip out from location to location. So yes, this is possible. Your body holds the key on how to do it. And when you understand it in yourself, you can then more easily extend that into some type of external technology.
I see. I would definitely work on that.
All right.
Okay. Moving on to the next one.
All right.
The individual's name is Viktor Grebennikov. He was a Russian scientist known for his claim to have invented a levitation platform which operated by attaching beta wings to the bottom of said platform. He discovered a bio-antigravity effect in 1988 and carried out experiments which led to the creation of a small craft that reached a speed of 1,500 kilometers an hour. It was inertialess and invisible from below. People who observed it from the ground saw a light spear or cloud. Okay, first of all, did this platform really exist, or is it just nonsense?
Well, it's not nonsense, but we'll describe it like this. It is something that is meant to stretch your imagination of what is possible. So what it is pointing at is a possibility rather than an actual literal thing. So oftentimes, many of the reports that you have of secret technologies, while some of them may be fictitious, are actually facets of information that are connected to phenomenon that is quite possible but has not been selected yet. So many of these stories, many of these things, while they may seem to be dubious claims, oftentimes are meant to actually really get the gears of your imagination turning so individuals on your planet can more easily imagine these technologies, thus giving rise to them as a result of following the intuitive promptings. So certain things have existed that match the description of what you are bringing to us now. This particular technology, in the way it is presented, does have a level of relevance. So what this individual is describing is something that can be created. Some of the effects are perhaps a little exaggerated. However, what is being described here has functional utility. It's just a matter of really expanding it in a way that perhaps is more appropriate for you and your project.
Well, I see it as, let's say, even if it was make believe, I see it as motivation to explore the idea of discovering the way insects fly. So
Yes, yes.
how do they fly?
Yes, it's specifically vibrational. While it might look like the movement of the wings are actually carrying them, the movement of the wings create a frequency. And it is the frequency, the subtle vibration generated by the movement of the insect wings that creates a very similar effect to what we had mentioned in relationship to the craft. It disrupts the idea of the electromagnetic forces that entangle with the effect you call gravity. And that displacement of the electromagnetic forces is what allows for the insects to actually levitate. It's more of a levitational field that it is created that enables insects to achieve flight. So it's a result of the frequency generated by the wings.
Once the gravitational field around that object is disrupted and levitation begins, the levitation is due to a repulsion force, particles coming out of the ground. You could call it reverse gravity. Is this correct?
The repulsion comes specifically from the field that one generates around themselves. So as you generate an anti-gravitational field around you, you become more dissonant with the effects of gravity, which enables a levitational effect to then be achieved and experienced. The levitational effect specifically is a self-generated effect that is the result of the displacement of those electromagnetic frequencies and forces. So it's entirely self-generated. The anti-gravitational effect doesn't necessarily come from the Earth in this instance, or whatever the major gravitational force is. It specifically is an effect that comes from the individual creating the anti-gravity field. Now, when the field is generated, that field may attract in to itself energies from the Earth that actually amplify and strengthen the anti-gravitational effect. So it might look as if the Earth or the body of gravity is actually propelling or assisting the thing that is levitating. However, the actual levitational effect comes from the frequency of the anti-gravitational field, and that field that attracts to it forces from different sources that further amplify it.
Okay, I see. And the idea of generating an anti-gravitational effect using a small device like a platform, as opposed to building a big, large craft, I would say the small personal device would definitely be a lot more difficult in that it will require advanced technology to miniaturize the parts needed to generate that anti-gravity field. Do you agree?
Yes, the idea is the parts would need to be scaled appropriately, and the technology would need to be increasingly more and more sophisticated the smaller the technology and platform becomes.
Okay, I see. All right, moving on. John Hutchison, who in 1979 experimented with longitudinal waves of Tesla. He accidentally discovered a collection of phenomena such as levitation of heavy objects, fusion of dissimilar materials like wood and metal. The effects occur as a result of radio wave interferences in a zone of spatial volume encompassed by high voltage sources like a Tesla coil. He claims he was only able to produce these effects in rare instances. Now, John Hutchison, a few things that he spoke about sound exaggerated, and I would like to determine if he was someone looking for attention or all his effects genuine and actually occurred.
Yes, well, again, with many of these individuals and the stories surrounding them, there are exaggerations, but it doesn't mean that there aren't genuine, repeatable facets of information that you can derive. So there are, especially with these older stories, elements of exaggeration present. And that might just be due to the idea of information becoming slightly distorted as it is preserved and passed throughout time. So there may be some distortions, but there is still a great deal of useful information that you can gather from studying this individual and their work. And that happens. There are a great deal of exaggerations that are present amongst all forms of recorded history. That's just the effect of the information being handled by different individuals across time. Different biases, different ideas, different fantasies, different facets of information get added on to what was. So that's to be somewhat expected, you could say, because the information changes as it is passed along.
Okay, the idea where he claimed that different materials fused together, would this be an example of density shifting?
Of course, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the result primarily of these different materials resonating with one another. You can shift the atomic frequencies of different materials in a way that can enable them to actually chemically bond together. And it can create the experience of a fusion of materials, and it's through shifting the atomic frequencies. This can allow for molecules to unpack, let's just say, and rearrange in new ways. So through a certain type of stabilized environment, such fusions can be created. Such effects can be produced.
And this would also be along the lines of, say, for an individual using technology such as this to shift, say, from third density to fifth density.
There are other technologies that perhaps may be more directly appropriate for the idea of shifting one's consciousness, but this technology does have that capacity, although its main function, again, is the idea of blending things together, merging things. So in order for that to happen, yes, there is an elevation of frequency, which enables the elemental makeup of those atoms to rearrange, to reorganize in a way that produces new molecules, new bonds. So new materials, fused materials, can then be generated. So think of it like this. The frequency is elevated, and from that elevated level, reorganization, rearrangement can then take place. And then the frequency is once more lowered and densified, so the actual fused result can then be experienced. So when that material is being exposed to the high frequency energies, the fusion is taking place on a level that is perhaps less perceivable to the human senses. But once that energy then lowers its frequency, that material then expresses itself once more in a densified form as a new material. And sometimes this can be subtle. It might not always be visibly detectable, but if it is measured with certain technologies that allow for the atomic configuration to be perceived, then elements of fusion can be seen and demonstrated in the manifested material.
All right. I've seen a video, Bashar. He suggested that if we wanted to see some success in the development of anti-gravity craft, he suggested that we follow in the footsteps of Nikola Tesla, John Hutchison, and John Searle. He did not say why, but I'm asking you why he would suggest John Hutchinson.
Because of this individual's methodologies for being able to shift the frequencies of different materials, because that's what is required to be able to achieve these anti-gravitational effects that you are describing. You need to really impose frequencies upon the materials and the technologies that you create that allows for that anti-gravitational effect to be achieved. So one part of this is actually building the technology itself, the structural requirements. The other part is activating the structure in a way that allows for these effects to be achieved. And because many of these scientists paid attention to the idea of vibration and resonance and the ability to shift reality through adjusting frequencies, through mastering their work and their technologies, you can then understand the vibrational tools required to get the technologies that you create to function in a holistic way. So the vibrational aspects of the technology can be understood through studying the works of these individuals.
Okay. And he also, like I said, he mentioned following in the footsteps of Nikola Tesla. I'm very familiar with Tesla and his work, but I could not see why Bashar recommended what aspect of Tesla's work will contribute to a flying saucer and a gravity craft.
Yes, yes. You're familiar with the idea of Tesla's designs for electrical power and the idea of electricity being generated through frequency and resonance?
Yes, it's resonant transformers. Absolutely.
Exactly, yes. When you understand how that technology works, you'll understand how to activate the vibrational qualities of these anti-gravitational technologies, because it's the exact same process, really. It's just a matter of, again, working with the proper frequencies that enable the anti-gravitational effect to be created. So, again, through studying your Fibonacci sequence and the underlying frequency that generates it, you can then understand the frequency and the counter frequency required to be able to then create an anti-gravitational field. And these technologies that Tesla has given rise to can give you hints on how to generate that energy, how to use that frequency once you calculate it to generate a high frequency stabilized field.
But Tesla was certainly capable of building this technology, but did he ever actually build himself a flying craft in secret?
He did build certain things that possess levitational qualities, yes. Something as refined and as polished as a craft, not quite. However, the designs for such were present in this individual's workplace, and minor experiments, smaller experiments that were used to test those theories and designs were things that he produced and gave rise to, which allowed for him to expand his theory and his model in a larger way, which acted as the scaffolding for his craft design, which existed largely in more of a blueprint form.
And a lot of the knowledge that he possessed, was this due to contacts with alien entities?
Yes, some of it
Perhaps?
had to do with his own soul connections, because understand your souls have many links, many connections to different incarnations, different periods of time. So some of the connections that he possessed on his own allowed for him to access, again, some of this more ancient knowledge. He was simply reviving knowledge your species already possessed, but had consciously lost. So he was drawing upon his own soul connections and his soul links to some of these more ancient civilizations, and that was one of his major sources for accessing the information that he accessed. However, of course, he also possessed many extraterrestrial connections, strong connections to the beings of Sirius, strong connections to the species of non-physical beings that are connected to your planet Venus. He had strong connections here as well. So the information that he demonstrated through his experiments has many different sources. He was simply an open conduit for that information to reach him. And his imagination and biology allowed for him to really play with and dissect the information he was receiving so he could understand for himself all the ins and outs related to it, thus allowing for him to produce technologies that were born of this information.
this motivation that I have for exploring this technology, could you tell me there's a soul connection where this might be coming from?
Yes, yes. You have a strong archetypal theme that relates to what you would consider to be the inventor energy, as well as the pioneer. There are archetypes that represent some of the major reasons why you have chosen to incarnate. And for yourself, the archetype of the inventor, the scientist, the pioneer, as well as the mystic, all have high levels of relevance for your journey and your life. So you share those archetypes with all other people that have also explored those archetypes as primary themes. So Tesla, Einstein, all of these people share very similar archetypes to you. So you're connecting with them on an archetypal level because that same current that inspired them to investigate and innovate is the same current that flows through you. And it is the energy of the scientist, the inventor, and for these individuals as well, the mystic. It's why your love of innovation also has very deep, meaningful, you could say spiritual or esoteric qualities as well, because all of those archetypes work together to really hone in on what it is you prefer to explore.
Yes, but all the information I have now that I had to find on my own, I had to research it. Why is it I haven't been able to simply just access it through my consciousness like Tesla did?
It has to do with the idea of learning how to match the frequency of these planes of reality where this information exists. So he, again, was particularly refined in that capacity in a way that enabled his imagination to clearly perceive, in particular, the Venusian energies, which enabled a, you could say, bridge of communication to then be built. So through the idea of really allowing for your consciousness to deeply resonate with these higher sources of information, you then can begin to download things instantaneously. So it's really a matter of refining your own psychic senses, your own psychic communication abilities, which will ultimately enable those aspects of yourself to become more active and more receptive so you too can begin to perceive this information. Because right now, what the channel is sharing with you is information that he's not necessarily thinking about. This information doesn't really represent the general thoughts that he has as he goes throughout his life. The thoughts and ideas that you're receiving now come from him simply matching our energy. And through that resonant link, information he's not really aware of normally can easily flow through him. And this is the same type of ability you're describing. And the ability is accessed through specifically training one's consciousness to be able to function as a communication device psychically. So you can do it too. Just refine yourself in such a way, and that skill will become more active.
All right, I'll work on that.
All right.
Okay, moving on to the next one. A man named Ralph Ring claimed that he is one of the surviving members who worked for Otis Carr in the 1960s. Otis Carr was a protege of Nikola Tesla, who taught him the principles of antigravity and free energy. Otis Carr claimed to have achieved harnessing power from gravity and built prototype spacecraft. The principle of which Carr said such circular motion machines will operate is that any vehicle accelerated to an axis rotation relative to its attractive inertial mass, the Earth, parentheses, immediately becomes activated by free space energy and acts as an independent force. Ralph testifies to have co-piloted with others a 45-foot in diameter craft a distance of 10 miles instantly. He also said that the metal turned to jello when it spun. He put his hand through a small prototype as its counter electromagnetic vortices achieved high speed differential velocities, and at even higher velocities, the prototype disappeared entirely.
Yes, and again, this is pointing to the teleportation qualities that can be developed. Yes, yes. So again, what you're describing here is the same technology relevant to UFO and anti-gravitational technologies relevant to UFOs. It's the same thing, but applied on a smaller scale by the individuals who understand how to practically apply these theories. So this information is genuine. Yes, this is genuine information. And the idea is that it's simply showing you that when you vibrate at the proper frequency, you can, again, to use the term we used before, blip out from your current frequency of space and time and blip in to another frequency of space and time, achieving teleportation. So this is another example of that technology, just demonstrated on a smaller scale.
As you're aware, when the government tends to locate these technologies, they tend to confiscate them. My question to you is, how far have they advanced in anti-gravity crafts um, in their black projects?
Quite far. Quite far. Not as far as these technologies have been taken by other species, but far enough where if you were to see some of the vehicles, they might appear somewhat otherworldly. They would have a different quality altogether than the normal types of aircraft that you generally see in your skies. So these things have been engineered. They're not as widely utilized, specifically because many countries are, in a sense, working to develop these types of technology. So if they are demonstrated too boldly, the idea is the craft then may become seen by more people. So some of the insider secrets then might leak if what you consider to be other governments were to observe these types of crafts. So they do exist, but they're oftentimes used much more covertly and do not receive much public attention, simply so these technologies can further be refined and developed with greater privacy, you could say.
Do they have the capability to explore the solar system, the outer edges, or are they mostly limited to the moon?
They are mostly limited to the idea of your planet. They're not really equipped for the idea of off-world travel just yet. Those require other adjustments and innovations in order for off-world travel to really be achieved. So these types of craft are mostly limited to terrestrial flight and activity. As the technology is further refined, as we have said, teleportation qualities can ultimately be developed. And once teleportation qualities have been crystallized and developed effectively enough, then off-world travel is possible through the idea of not necessarily linearly going from one point to another, but simply teleporting from one point to another. And that type of understanding of how to do that will come once your species really understands how to measure the energy of all that you experience. Because, as you know, your entire physical reality is made of energy. It is simply energy vibrating in a particular way that creates the illusion of being in a solid reality. So once that underlying energy template level becomes measurable to your scientists, then they will be able to measure and calculate the specific frequencies of certain locations and time periods throughout the universe. And once that type of calculation is achieved, your species can essentially travel anywhere. There will be no limit really on where your species can go. So as you continue to evolve yourselves and come to that point of recognition that you are in a self-created collective dream, then you'll understand how to measure the energy of that dream. And these types of capabilities can then be developed more comprehensively.
It kind of makes me envious knowing that these government factions have been building these crafts in secret. It's almost like, why do they get to have all the fun? But at the same time, I'm convinced that I'm actually not too far behind. I may not have a huge multi-billion-dollar budget, but I have been acquiring enough information and knowledge on how to get somewhat closer to where they are.
Yeah, and they're not the only ones doing it. There are private companies as well that also have this, and of course, some scientists that work independently that also have access to some of these things. Now, of course, with lower budgets, the technologies oftentimes are less refined, but understand these things aren't solely in the hands of governments. And there is a genuine desire that your collective has for this information to become more mainstream, which is why things like UFO disclosure processes are happening now. And it's also why individuals such as yourself are receiving these intuitive understandings of how to create such technologies. It's also the reason why the information we're sharing with you this day is able to come through, because your collective has said enough with the secrecy. Let's take these innovative gifts, because that's what they are, these technologies, these discoveries, these innovations are all gifts that you're giving yourselves. Let's take these gifts and distribute them throughout the collective. And that's really the point of evolution you're all at right now. You're learning how to take these things that oftentimes have been coveted and hoarded, and you're learning how to then share these things responsibly with your collective. That's the process you're all going through right now. So many things in the years to come will be revealed, will be shared with your mainstream collective, which can enable things like the quality of life to improve for many people on your world. So right now, you're in the beginning stages of this collective revealing.
That's very exciting to know. Well, at least that I'm not alone and I have assistance in this. Is there anything that else that you could share with me that could help me move along further
Yes.
as
Do you
I
practice lucid dreaming?
know?
It may benefit you to develop this capacity. For understand, when you're in the dream realm, you can interact with these technologies directly. And you can actually take them apart and put them back together in the dream realm, just as Tesla did with his imagination while awake. So if you train yourself to become lucid, you can summon these technologies forth and in depth study them and learn about them. And should you record your dreams and meditate upon them, you will find you will learn how to do what you did in the dream, but in your physical life.
Yes, that's exactly what I need. Uh, an opportunity to test it out without having to invest any money, any time, and you could work out the flaws, or whatever else that needs to be known before you make a commitment to it. So I see what you're saying.
Exactly. Yes. You'll understand very in-depthly what works and what does not work before you actually gather the resources to act it out physically. The dream world can allow for you to have that sort of sandbox trial experience of the idea.
All right. Well, this of course means I had to learn lucid dreaming. Since time is drawing to a close, do you have any suggestions on lucid dreaming?
There's many different ways to grow the ability. Understand the color violet, the color purple, can activate the part of the brain and the nervous system required for skillful lucid dreaming. So meditating on the color violet, the color purple can really assist you here. The third eye, as you call it, has a strong connection to that color. So as this part of your body is developed more through breathing and visualization, it can be cultivated in a way that ultimately enables you to strengthen your lucid dreaming ability. So those are some things you can do meditationally to assist. In terms of more, you could say, physical ways of blossoming this ability, keeping a daily dream journal will assist you. Even if you don't remember the dream, just write about how you feel when you wake up. Get into the habit, the cycle of writing down your dreams, or at least what you can remember or feel of your dreams while you are awake first thing in the morning. And you'll find through journaling in this way, you will be training the analytical, logical part of your brain to remain more active while you sleep, thus enabling an increase in the probability that you will become lucid in your dreams. So these are all things that you can do. The final thing we'll mention as a tip, as a tool to assist you here, is the idea of working with what you call binaural beats. There are certain binaural beats that can also activate these qualities in your brain that allow for portions of your brain responsible for higher cognition to become active as you dream. So these are all little things you can do that will increase the probability. The key is to remain consistent and to continue the endeavor, even if it appears as if you're not really getting too many results. Because oftentimes, with every repetition of these activities, you are pushing your development in that direction a little bit more, a little bit more, and a little bit more. And then at a certain point, a major milestone is reached. And that might be you successfully remembering one of your dreams very vividly and working lucidly within that dream. And that may happen perhaps once a week, once a month, but as you stay with these practices and keep them going, it will become more frequent. It's just a matter of being consistent with it.
All right. And one more thing before I go.
All right.
I want to begin utilizing copper rods for pyramids, personal pyramids to meditate inside. And since I'm going to be using my consciousness in the direction of lucid dreaming, how much of an effect would the pyramid meditations have on that direction that I've chosen?
Yes, it will greatly assist you, especially if you sit in a way where your crown chakra is perfectly aligned with the apex of the pyramid. Because understand, the pyramid, as you know, represents a strong base with the top of the structure coming to a central point, a central apex. And as you align your geometry with the geometry of the pyramid, it allows for you to access the energies of your crown chakra and beyond with the assistance of the pyramidal geometries. So it's like the energies from the earth and your own energy field while you're in the pyramid go up the copper rods to the apex, and then the apex directs that compiled energy into your higher chakras, into the higher levels of your aura, thus enabling you to, again, maintain a level of clarity and consciousness as you experience those higher levels of the self. So the pyramid can assist you here in developing a relationship with those higher centers. And it can allow for you to do it in a grounded way due to its strong base. If it is a four-sided pyramid, understand it will be very grounding. If it is a three-sided pyramid, it will be more elevating, more pertinent to the upper realms, the upper levels of consciousness. So if you desire for more rooting, we would encourage a four-sided base. But create what serves your needs.
I'm taking a trip to Egypt next month.
Right.
I wanted to utilize the energies of the Great Pyramid because it's obvious I can see how pyramid that size can have a huge amplifying effect on the experiences that you just spoke about.
Well, while you're there, remember, you can always activate the dormant energies present within the pyramid, because all of those hieroglyphics are what you call sigils. They are symbols that have been programmed with energy, that are designed to gain and gather energy from the land and from the individuals that empower them. And that gathered energy is then directed upwardly through the apex of the pyramid. So using your breath, using your imagination, you can activate these endless sigils that are the hieroglyphics present around and within the pyramids. Imagining that all of the different pictographs illuminate with light, that all of the different symbols, all of the different hieroglyphics illuminate like they're glowing, like they're alive. And simply breathe into them, activate them using your imagination astrally to do it, and continue to breathe and illuminate the symbols until the whole pyramid is glowing with color. And then using your breath, using your intention, your will, direct all of that light up the pyramid, up into space, up into the corresponding stars that align with these pyramids. So you can actually activate the pyramid. This type of thing we're mentioning was originally done ceremonially, ritualistically, with many practitioners. They would breathe life into all of the hieroglyphics, all of the symbols, the sigils, empowering the pyramid with the activated energy. And that energy would then be broadcasted into the universe, into the cosmos, allowing for the energy to be multiplied. So when it finally reflected back to the earth and manifested on the earth, it would be much stronger, much more powerful. So the pyramid can be used not just to access information, but to also manifest specific things into the physical reality. Because that's what the universal cosmic energies do. When you broadcast frequencies into the cosmos will multiply that energy. So when it finally manifests, it will be much stronger, much bigger, and in some cases, much more all-encompassing. Global shifts can be made for your whole species through activating and working with the pyramids in conscious, intentional ways.
All right. All those tools you just shared are definitely very empowering, and I'm going to begin working on all of them right away.
Well, how exciting.
Yes. And I just hope this whole interaction was very exciting for you as well. I'm sure it was.
It was incredibly exciting for us. Talking about these things are some of our favorite topics. So we thank you for allowing for us to play with you in this rather scientific way of exploration.
I'm glad to hear that. And well, as I go through my journey, I will share with you feedback on what successes I've had in these technologies.
All right. Well, happy trails and happy exploring these secrets that you all ironically already know, but have simply temporarily let go of.